episodes anywhere, like anytime YouTube. Right reason. So I kind of figured that's kind of what I do on my role. I cover a lot of cases which were originally featured on Unsolved Mysteries, and I'm so happy to see that there's kind of been a rejuvenation in the show recently because now you can watch all the seasons on YouTube and Amazon Prime, and they've since did a Unsolved Mysteries release for Netflix and launched a new podcast. So you can tell that there is still a huge market for the show for people who love it.
You and I, of course, going back to Robert Stack, simply because he had the voice, he had the look, he had the trench coat. But really, the stories are so fascinating. They would go from UFOs to some sort of weird lake creature to an unsolved murder, all kinds of different cases. And so, perfect fit for someone like you or someone like myself.
Yeah, I will admit that when I was younger, I was most fascinated by the ghost and UFO stories. But as I got older, I got more interested in the true crime ones, and that's kind of why I started the trail with Cold. I would go back and watch these old segments that aired 30 years ago, and then find out that the case was still unsolved after all this time. So I figured I'd like to do a more in-depth look into this case on the podcast, and they really did very well at picking a lot of their cases because some of them are really baffling mysteries where you just cannot come up with a solution for what might have happened.
I'm just so into the pros and cons of all these different formats, and obviously we work in audio format, but it has the benefit of us being able to go into more detail, whereas the visual format, such as a TV show or a documentary, you get to see the players, and I think it helps inform the audience in a different way about the cases. But I think the best way to deal with any of these cases is, of course, to listen about them and watch them.
Oh, exactly, because there's only a limited amount of information you can put in a TV show that airs on a network in a time slot, but we podcasters have a lot of creative freedom, and that was kind of one of my initial brainstorms where I thought I would cover cases that were featured on Unsolved Mysteries, but I would dig up additional information that you did not learn in the original segment. And a lot of other podcasters have done the same thing. They seek to give more well-rounded looks at some of these cases.
And I know you're really into mysteries as well. Has there been a mystery, even one perhaps that you haven't covered yet, that fascinates you?
It was actually the subject of my very first episode of The Trail Went Cold, and if you watch Unsolved Mysteries on YouTube today, it's on the very first episode hosted by Robert Stack. But it's the death of a woman named Aileen Conway, a housewife and mother who lived in Lawton, Oklahoma. And she was killed in a flaming car crash on a lonely dirt road about 15 miles away from her home. And even though it was initially ruled to be an accident, her husband did not believe it because there were just so many bizarre clues. Because on the day that she was killed, he returned home and found out that she had left the iron on, that a garden hose was running into the pool, she had left the bathtub filled up, and the phone was off the hook. So it seemed unusual that she would have just decided to go out for a drive and get into an accident. And she had never been out to that area on that lonely dirt road, and they eventually uncovered evidence that suggested that she had been the victim of arson. But even after 30 years, we're no closer to solving this, thinking, okay, if she was murdered, who did it? What was the motive? And how did she wind up in her car on this lonely dirt road and get burned so badly in a case of arson? It's just one of those cases where no matter how hard you rack your brain trying to come up with an airtight theory, you just can't.
I'm much like you. I think when I was younger and I watched Unsolved Mysteries, I was waiting, hoping that I would see video evidence of aliens or ghosts or what have you. But as time has gone on, I look back at cases they've covered that were crime related, and they stand out as being more interesting.
What's great is that a lot of these older cases that were featured on Unsolved Mysteries are now getting solved thanks to DNA. Just a couple days before we recorded this, they announced an arrest in the case of Roger Dean, a guy who was killed inside his home in an apparent kidnapping and extortion attempt from a masked man. And the gunman made a fatal mistake because he left his mask behind at the scene. And back in 1985, he probably didn't think it was going to be any big deal, but they extracted DNA from that mask and entered it into a genetic genealogy database, and it eventually led to a suspect named Michael Jefferson, who has just been arrested 36 years after the crime took place.
I think back to Golden State Killer, and there are people out there that have committed crimes who think they've gotten away with it, but that's the hope we have now. We're seeing cases closed, solved after decades.
Like, I remember watching some of these unsolved mysteries cases on TV like 20, 30 years ago and thinking they would never be solved. But now, because someone may have left their DNA behind, any case is solvable, and I'm seeing resolutions in these cases I grew up watching. It's still pretty surreal.
And I know I've been asked this, I don't know how you feel about it, but I have people ask me, if a case is unsolved for a long time, and all of a sudden it is solved, and we get an answer, does it ever feel like a letdown in a way? Because the mystery was so great, and there were theories, there were discussions. But I know, speaking for myself, one of the things that draws me to true crime is justice. And I don't care what the story is. If they can prove what happened in a case, they can bring someone to justice, I think it's the best outcome there is.
Oh yeah, like I definitely agree 100%, because even though these might be intriguing mysteries, you have to remember that there are victims in these stories, and they have families and friends who are looking for a resolution in these cases. So no matter how much time has passed, if they're able to solve them and bring the perpetrator to justice, then that's only a good thing.
Have you had contact post-episode with family members of cases you've discussed?
Yes, a few times, and I won't say who it was, but there was one case I released an episode for a couple years ago involving a father and son who disappeared together, and there was some ambiguity because the father's girlfriend at the time had been murdered, and they weren't sure if he had killed her and gone on the run with his son, or if maybe both of them were victims from an unknown third party who got rid of the body. And after I released my episode, I heard from the child's biological mother, who has been seeking justice for nearly 30 years now, and she thanked me for keeping the case alive by featuring it on the podcast, and she gave me some information which had not been released publicly, which finally gave me more of an idea about what likely happened. And I'm still kind of hoping that they can still solve this thing, because we have two missing people and one unsolved murder, and it's very apparent that someone has gotten away with it for a very long time.
I always appreciate family members. Fortunately, most of them have been very praiseworthy of us, or at least appreciative of us. I had a few complaints. One was a recent case involving the death of a young guy, and his brother wrote it and was very upset with us about the way we covered it. When you're dealing with people who are emotionally tied into a case, they may not understand why you cover something a certain way. And Justin and I, while we're not advocates, we wouldn't describe ourselves that way. We still like to
you're back.
hold
What can I do
prosecutors
for
to a
you?
certain standard, and we would like to see a certain level of evidence. And so, if it feels like they're getting away with just creating a story rather than presenting evidence, we're going to call them out on it. Either way, I still appreciate people writing in, because it means they're listening and they gave it a chance.
Exactly. I mean, because my podcast
It's
exclusively
you.
covers unsolved cold cases, I think that there is an appreciation from them that,
All
that
right.
these cases are still
Bye,
being
then.
remembered and getting out there, and because there is still a chance they can be solved. But I'm sure there's some families out there who would prefer to move on with their life and not have people still talking about these cases after all these years, because the memories are too painful. But most of the time, the reactions are positive.
And I don't know if you've had a chance to speak with any true crime authors, but I know some of them have taken quite a bit of heat for covering cases where family members said, it's not your story, we're trying to move on, and you're bringing it all up again.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that, especially with solved cases. I know that can be kind of a controversial thing for both authors and podcasters, where the story is technically solved and the case is closed and there's nowhere else really to go. And I think sometimes the families would prefer to move on, but people still want to tell these stories in book or podcast form, and then you can kind of understand why the families would feel that way.
that we want to talk about. We think there are lessons in there. We think there are warnings in there. And so we'll always be interested in telling these stories as long as we have voices, I imagine.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, that's the thing is that as long as you do it respectfully and very nice to the victims, because that's also an important thing, that if someone was the victim of a horrific crime, they should not be forgotten, even if their killer is caught and put away. And I always have the mentality to focus more on the victims themselves than the actual killers, because they're the ones who deserve to be remembered.
We definitely strive for that. And it was interesting because
I'll
we
be up
recently
there
were
as soon as I
contacted by
can.
a listener who was just a little upset with us, just a little bit, just because we had named a recent episode after the killer. And I honestly
I
did
have
it
some
because
ideas.
I didn't think anyone would be able to pronounce the name of the victim.
Oh,
So I don't know if you ever have that where you're like, well, I'm going to name it this, or if you just straight up have a process you do, and as part of that, you're only naming it after the victim, etc.
well, pretty much, because in most of these cases, we don't even know who the killer was, so you kind of have to name the episode after the victim as a necessity. I guess there are some situations where you'll call it, if, say, the Orange Sock Murders, if it's multiple victims rather than the names themselves. But yeah, I still most of the time name
Forgive
the
me,
episodes after
but
the person.
perhaps you have not seen the prices
Well, I would
for
like to
our
thank you
ingredients.
for joining me tonight.
We need a way
Robin.
to get
And I
them
look forward
cheaper.
to seeing you
Perhaps,
at a future CrimeCon,
Maggie will
hopefully
know.
CrimeCon UK this September.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. We've hung out a lot at a lot of these past events, but I haven't seen you in person for nearly 2 years now, so I'm looking forward to a reunion.
Well, we did hang out in Toronto, did we not?
Yes, which was August of 2019. We were on stage together for a live show, but I think that's the last time I've seen you face to face.
I think we did have a lunch or something.
Yes, we had a get-together at Christie's
Écoute-moi.
house as well.
Do not go
I hope
looking
you
for
have a great
supplies
evening,
in Van
and
Or.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Robin.
Oh, definitely. My pleasure. It was great to record an episode for the first time.
Take care, Robin.
Okay, have a good night.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to this special episode. We'll be at CrimeCon in London on September 25th and 26th. If you'd like to come, tickets are on sale now. Go to crimecon.co.uk and use the ticket code GenY21 to get 10% off. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus and the Wondery app to listen ad-free.
Some clients have sent us some new requests. Allons-y. This will be thin soup.
Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free. From Wondery.
Do I see a twinkle in your eye around Madame Faker, huh? She's quite a woman, you know. À plus tard.
All right, not sure if you heard, but I sent Lem up north to
doing
collect
tonight,
some special ingredients that should really help us
Justin.
broaden
How
our
are you
market.
feeling tonight?
Stuff Danny Lee won't even have heard of. Felt like a
watched
really
the
good
show
job
recently.
for Lem.
Right, you know, I
With
don't
you
know if
around,
anybody knows
he's been a
this,
little
but
jealous.
we cover true crime.
Anyway, he's bringing it in by
In the
boat
last
and
few
should be
years, it's
docking
been more
soon in
difficult for me to
Annisburg.
watch
There's
true crime
already some wagons
documentaries
arranged to
despite
bring it all
people writing
back,
in and
but
saying, "You have to
I'd
watch
appreciate
this
it if you'd head over
documentary on
there just,
Netflix or
you
Amazon
know,
Prime,
for some
whatever."
extra
It's
security.
mostly just because
Better
usually
safe than
getting out
sorry
true
these
crime
days.
and just all the research and reading that we do. But yeah, sitting down and watching documentaries, I think I do it about once a year at the most. I recently watched something on Netflix, Why Did You Kill Me? This is a pretty interesting documentary because it has to do with family taking action after a loved one is murdered and getting to the bottom of why she was murdered. The family members, they definitely have a journey where they have to look at their own lives and reevaluate things as they go, and I think that's pretty powerful.
I'll have to check it out. I haven't watched it myself, but I will on your recommendation.
And I definitely feel like toward the end of this documentary, Justin, you'll almost feel like they're speaking your language.
I'm sure. Just from the little bit that I know of it, I'm sure they will be. This holiday season will certainly be more special than last. It's finally time to get together and exchange thoughtful gifts. Deeply compared. Let's call it holidays.
Land ahoy!
This is the
Grab
absolute
that
best
plank,
time
sit
to do
down
a
there.
Special offer of 60% off your first 3
Whew,
months with Audible.
permission to
More
come
without
aboard.
you're into because
So,
Audible has a
This here's the merchandise. It's top-notch stuff, so be careful with it. Come on, help me get it unloaded. Ooh, watch your foot in there, landlubber. Wait, where are the wagons? I arranged 2 drivers. God damn it! I planned this whole thing. Least folks can do is show up on time. Train coming in. Just act natural.
Everyone stay right where you are. This is Agent Reed Hickson of the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Lemuel Fact, you are under arrest for the manufacture and distribution of an illegal substance, escaping state custody, running bail, and tax evasion. And today, we will bring the fullest force of the law down upon you. You just can't stop running your mouth, can you moronic Nick? You need to watch who you talk to. Move in and bag those rats. And bring Fight to me.
Hold them off. I'll try and start the engine.
Whenever you want with offline mode. Download best.
Oh, God dang.
Come on, hurry! Morning of February 24th.
Let's move up.
Sherry actually called.
Let's get the hell out of here.
So we had a condo in Van Nuys.
and unload the goods downriver.
Returned home just before 6 p.m. That there was broken glass driving his condos laid out. There is a of the garage door. He didn't know where the glass was from, but it would end up being from the glass doors and windows that balcony. Glass had fallen down. He noticed that the garage door was open.
Oh shit, look! They're lined up along the coast! I'm a sitting ducks! Take them down!
Speak to his wife all day. And it so much that she grab some dinner.
Dynamite! They're throwing dynamite!
Why don't I have any rifles? Why don't I have any rifles? I can use.
Coming up the Van Horn! Stay on the lookout! I'll bring us in close and slow, and we can see if it's safe to dock.
You can tell from her eyes and her skin color.
No rifle ammo whatsoever. You can't even pick up any ammo.
Hands were actually she was so stiff. Come outside of the car. It was called his neighbor.
No, there's more!
So
Yeah, you keep moving!
later,
Play some space so we can get out!
she's dead. So
That's a long flag! Hold them back!
actually sidestepped into the condo.
They got a sniper!
Said that he saw blood of the so the chairs were police arrived. Ransacked. She's been clubbed. Disaster statue. Legend for the head. Miscellaneous objects. There were wounds on her wrists that indicated someone had
Especially when I
died
couldn't pick up any fucking ammo.
There were serious injuries on her face because
Can't pick up any.
it was stereo equipment. TVs and things like that. Footage from the wall. Nothing was taken. It was Amy first came into the room. They weren't expecting her to be there. So this was a launch driver. They killed her. Aaron, I saw some crime scene photos. It was a prolonged stroke, is how they described it, but it was a fight trauma. They didn't find any signs of forced entry, but they did find bits of her fingernails, like her left arm, a blanket that was full of bullet holes. Gunshot wounds, so they assumed that was a final killing shots. Obviously, two gunshot.
And also, they never recovered the gun.
Gun wasn't there. I was gonna say there was no statue.
For Christ's sake, they're still coming!
This poetry tried to make her unconscious. She kept fighting.
Looks like I made it to Sisika after all! Don't worry about bumping my pillows, boys! This is just a passing visit!
Really, the only witness Justin was that housekeeper that was next door to Van.
That housekeeper gave time in the morning that she heard was going down. Investigators
What?
Here is that John had been dating another person, but as soon as he met Sherry, that was it for him. They became engaged in
Try that mission.
1985, the following year. From all accounts, it was a very happy marriage. But again, they only had been together as a married couple for a few months.
Now, before John had met Sherry, he had, I guess, what he would call a on and off again or friends with benefits relationship with a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. He and Stephanie had met in the early 80s. He was studying mechanical engineering at UCLA.
Land ahoy!
Stephanie was a political science major.
Grab that plank and set it down there.
They played intramural basketball
Permission
together.
to come aboard.
Like I said, they were just
So,
dating on
this
and off.
here's the merchandise. It's
Apparently,
top-notch
John
stuff, so be
wasn't
careful with it.
quite
Come on,
as into
help me get it
her
unloaded.
as Stephanie
Ooh, ooh, ooh,
was
watch your
into
foot in there,
him.
landlubber.
He started
Wait,
dating other people,
where are the wagons?
such as Sherry.
I arranged two
This didn't
drivers.
go over well with
God
Stephanie.
damn it!
She
I
was
planned this whole thing. Least folks can do is show up on time. Train's coming in. Just act natural.
It's actually
Everyone stay right where you are.
engaged.
This is Agent
Stephanie
Reed
reached out to
Hickson
John and said,
of the
"I would like to
Bureau
talk
of
to you."
Internal Revenue.
She invited him over to her
Lemuel
condo.
Fact, you are under arrest
She put it
for
all
the
in line. She
manufacture
said,
and
"I need you, I
distribution
want
of an
you,
illegal
I'm in love with
substance,
you,
escaping
and
state
he
custody,
slept
running
with her,
bail, and tax
basically,
evasion.
that was his
And
way of
today,
giving her
we will
closure,
bring the
he said,
fullest
but
force of the law
That didn't work
down
out so
upon
well,
you.
And he had to tell Sherry the
You
next
just
day what
can't
happened.
stop
Yeah, I
running
don't
your
know,
mouth,
guys
can
are
you?
so dumb.
You
You don't
moronic
sleep
hick.
with somebody to get
You need to
closure.
watch who you talk to.
It's twisted.
Move in and bag those
The right
rats.
thing to do.
And bring
I have
five
no
to
idea
me.
what his
You
reasoning
hold them
was.
off.
That was
I'll
true
try
or
and
not,
start the
but
engine.
We did go through with things with Sherry, and he confessed to her. All about it. Said, if you bring up something like this in our relationship, I really want to be married to you. You're my person. Okay. I mean, I'm sure this is contact with Stephanie. She did something exactly appreciate. Just a few days after the engagement, things kind of went down, Sherry, she said, I can't have John. Sherry, she did after that. Tell her parents, John, all about Stephanie.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Wearing her police uniform.
You think you're above the law?
Rhino Hickson, that won't be the last of them. That bastard never does things by hand.
So much. And she
What a
actually
mess.
John.
I don't know how the hell they got out. Can't
Way
go
too
down
much
like this.
baggage. I know.
Promise me, man, this is
And she said, this woman scares me. She's not me, and she's a police officer. So, my son said, she just pleaded John to tell Steph to leave her alone. John,
shit. No,
take
you
this
see
very
the
seriously.
boats? Keep them off of us.
Told Sherry, just to ignore her.
I'll bring us in close and slow, and we can see if it's safe to dock.
She saw men trying to steal her stereo. She confronted one of them, pointed a gun at her. She took off running. So now we have two men that are robbing homes in this area. Just a few blocks. She was gone. Hasn't gone. So this is kind of fitting.
Shit, no, there's more of them here too. But we need to keep
Why
moving.
can't I
Clear me some
shoot
space so we can get out of here.
I can't even shoot him. Just let me shoot him.
Before they blow my head off. Oh no! Watch out!
I would just say a sexual. This isn't just your regular everyday.
Here, bullets there.
Situation. She's
We're clear, Van Horn. Some extra. No. Yeah, why did I go and fix it?
First I thought
Guns up,
maybe
they're still on
she
us.
had her arm around his
I don't
face.
have any ammo I can use, because I don't have any specialized ammo.
So my arm was done while she was dying, shortly after she died. That changes everything. This means it happened during the day. This is something else. It sounds personal. Very.
Scarier than black. Especially for people like Raydale, it could get on us.
Eyes front! Both
Sales
straight ahead of us!
feel like it, but there was an actual hellhole in your store and zombies attacking you in your phones. That's the premise.
minutes left.
Looks like you're finally getting the message. Woo-hoo! I'm gonna push on to San Denis, see if we can
I
dock
think
there.
her family was pretty upset.
It'll be easier to lose him in the
They
city.
were hoping that he
Boy, I sure ain't looking forward to telling Aunt Maggie about all this.
They
It
thought
hardly
that he
falls
would
into the
take
category
this
of
out
keeping her nose clean, but all you can do is
carry a
roll with the
torch
punches,
for
am I right?
their daughter, his dead daughter.
Yeah, I don't see any more of them, do
So we
you?
went on a wrong adventure.
Okay,
Wrong
I'm
plus
San
get
Denis.
the
Thank God
weapons
for
I
that.
had because I can't
There's no
use.
way I'm going back to jail.
parents for
So
several
I'd rather
years.
die than be alone in a cell for even
Some of these
1
I
minute
can't
with that
use.
maniac.
Went on vacation to Hawaii. And so did Stephanie. Apparently, he met up with her a couple times in 1990. And over all this time, Justin, the case just grows cold because police believe it's a robbery gone wrong. They don't have any suspects. They have possible descriptions of a couple of Latino men, but that's it. And so,
Okay.
over that course of time,
I think that's all of them.
Stephanie
Christ, that was a
adding on
close
years to
one.
her career at the
Oh, all right, these
She's
docks
very
look
successful.
clear.
She
Let's
worked
unload
as a
and get the
treasurer
hell out of here.
For the LA Women's Police Officers Association.
All right,
She
that's the
helped
last
raise
one.
money to provide
Oh,
child
thank you.
care for
Goddamn
children of
revenuers.
police officers,
It's like Hickson's
and
got
she
some sixth
actually
sense.
ran a private
I'll find how this got
investigation
out, believe you me.
Eventually
Starting
married
with them
another
drivers.
detective.
Can't trust anybody
She
these
worked with,
days.
fell in love
Anyway,
with.
at least we
She
got what we came
survived
for.
Thyroid
I'll
cancer.
see you back at the house.
And adopted a daughter.
Yeah.
Police, when they did investigate this murder, they did do a lot of things right. They had a thing called a chronologue, chronological order log. They documented all these things and added to the report all the time. And in that report, they listed that Sherry's family had called in and asked if Stephanie was a suspect. They also swabbed that bite mark on Sherry, kept that as evidence for years.
And that brings us to 2008, 2009, where Stephanie Lazarus is a full-fledged detective and promoted to the art theft detail. This is a highly respected officer, a highly respected
Lamb.
detective.
What a fool.
Wasn't there an
What I'm
author
gonna do with that boy?
interviewed her
Thank
at this
God I
point?
sent you to Amsterdam.
Matthew
He
McCall.
dead or behind
Yeah.
bars
What
otherwise.
was his impression?
Since these new recipes are coming along, though, I think we'll get a lot of new
Professional.
customers out of it.
That was the first
I'm working
word
on
I
a
think
plan
he
for our
said
next
was,
excursion,
"She's very
something a
professional."
little more
She's
covert.
highly respected.
Speak soon.
I mean, she's been promoted multiple times. She's on different boards, does different things. Everyone looks up to her.
How can
And
I
not
help?
one disciplinary report in the 30 years that she'd been working there.
That's impressive. But the cold case squad, they're looking into Sherry's case. And it was February of 2009. This case is going to get a microscope put on it. And the only thing
I think
they
you're
had
gonna have to
left
save up for
was
that one.
That swab from the bite mark. They decided they would have that tested because now DNA is a thing.
What was actually 5 years before. when
Yes, it might be
LAPD had
time for some
tested that bite
additions.
swab, and they found a DNA profile. It was a woman's DNA profile.
So 2004, they test this swab, find out it's female.
Good luck
but
out there.
Nothing's done with that for 5 years. So this cold case team
Appleberry.
is looking at that and going, okay, so let's throw this DNA against our databases and
hello.
upload it. They don't find any matches.
Otra vez.
They go to that chrono log. There's huge gaps in it. They're missing tons of information. But they did see a name get mentioned once. Stephanie's name.
So there's this detective, Cliff Shepard. He's talking with the cold case squad about male and female burglary teams in the area. Remember, they're still looking at this as could be a robbery gone wrong. So maybe there was a woman involved. He found out there was a team that was one male, one female, operating in 1986. This could be a hit, right?
Yeah.
And this woman, they checked, she was not incarcerated or in custody during that time, but she was back in jail in 2009. They look at this and they determined that it wasn't her. So then they're looking back at there are some things that don't quite match. Lisa's home had things stolen, like jewelry. The upper floor was disturbed. There was forced entry. And they left in their own car. They didn't steal any cars. So there are a lot of differences here. So they start re-examining the so-called robbery at Sherry's condo. And now that they're looking at it in a new light, they're looking at it and seeing a staged burglary. So they come up with a new theory.
Yeah, they're thinking this killer, they came in, they either had a key or were able to pick the lock, which that's different from all these other burglaries in the area. This person went into the home to specifically target Sherry, fired 2 shots, one of which missed and shattered that patio window. Now, I think initially, when they saw this broken window, they thought maybe that's where the intruder came in. But all the glass was on the outside, so it had obviously been broken from the inside. They felt that Sherry got her intruder into a headlock, and that's when she was bit. The intruder eventually overpowered her and shot her. I think it's a good theory.
So the next step is to go back and talk with John Rutten. And they asked him, do you know any women who would want to hurt Sherry?
I think he does.
He does. He comes up with the name Stephanie Lazarus. So the LAPD, this is many years later, decades later, they launch an investigation into Stephanie Lazarus that lasts for about 4 months. They want to get her DNA, and they're prepared to arrest her if there's a match. They also try to keep this operation very secret because I guess they're worried that someone will speak to her and tell her what's going on.
Blow the lid on all of it.
So they are planning this out, and when they write about Stephanie, they refer to her as number 5.
What was the name of the operation?
The art thief.
They're playing this off like they're investigating an art thief. And what department is Stephanie over right now?
That very thing, art theft. So it's interesting though, the cold case squad, their office is right across the hall from Stephanie's. And that's their suspect. So they come into work and they're investigating Stephanie, and she's right across the hall, coming and going obviously, and they see her all the time.
And they're drinking coffee with her,
Post office.
shooting the breeze at the water dispenser down the hall. They have this DNA, so they wait for her to get a glass of water, soda. She sets it down. They run over there and they grab the straw out of the cup. They have that tested. What do they find?
They find stunning information. There was a 1.7 sextillion to 1 chance that the DNA did not belong to Stephanie Lazarus.
Sextillion. I don't know how many zeros that is, so I'm gonna Google it real quick. It's 1,000 raised to the 7th power. It has 21 zeros.
Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Every day.
In other words, Stephanie is not just a suspect. She's the only suspect.
But how do they go about tricking a fellow police officer, talking to them, and letting
So,
them
am I right in thinking
She
you're
is
here
the
for
one
more
they're
of all these little
investigating.
master
This is
schemes?
tricky.
That's where they need to get her to talk, and they prefer to do it in a controlled environment. So
No,
they need
I'm not.
to continue the ruse for a little
All
bit
right.
longer.
Well, see you
Yeah.
again.
They do get a couple other officers that do not know who Stephanie is. They don't care about her reputation. They handpick these guys to do the interview.
June 5th, 2009. This is about 23 years after the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. Stephanie is in her office. Another officer approaches her and says, "Got someone in custody. They might have some information on a case you're working on." She gladly goes with this officer. Enter the jail. The officer has to turn in their weapon. She does that, and she's led to an interview room and ask her to sit down. I think at this point, she has some idea that they've tricked her.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're bringing in this guy immediately, or typically the guy would already be sitting there.
And
they would have her come in, but she's the only one there. They begin talking with her. As anyone knows, the interview rooms are completely monitored.
But they try to put her at ease by saying, this is just a discussion. And that's what they put down on the paper.
I really want to give these guys credit because this was an amazing interrogation to watch. Immediately, she gets kind of defensive about being questioned in this basement interview room. But they tell her, like,
Bonjour, patron.
if we did this upstairs, people would
Allons-y.
see us taking you into one of those rooms. There's eyes on those rooms, and you know rumors are going to spread. You've remarried. We don't want to question you about this situation, and people think the
No
wrong
one
thing.
will complain
We're
about
trying
this.
to respect you. We're trying to respect your decency and question you down here. And all we're trying to do is eliminate suspects in a case, like we always do. But Stephanie knows that it's never that simple, right?
For those that are interested, you can watch the entire interview on YouTube. But these detectives, they're talking with Stephanie.
You
and they
are
start to
changing
get
the
to
flavor for this
the
batch,
real
sir.
important
We
stuff.
must
They start
be
asking her
patient.
about John's wife.
I think I
And she
missed
knows that Sherry was murdered. They ask her,
There are some
do you remember
kinds
her
of
name? And she said,
civilization you
Shelley,
need to leave the
Sherry.
city to find,
And
no?
the whole time she's talking, her actions are all greatly exaggerated. Her eye rolls, the way she moves her mouth, her body movements, everything is very like, I'm trying to remember back, and she just seems very nervous, would you say?
Yeah, I feel like unless you're a sociopath, most people can see right through your BS. It doesn't take an investigator, it doesn't take a seasoned police officer. You can watch interrogations and you know when that person's lying. You know when they're being put off. And, you know, with Stephanie, she's looking at them and going, you're trying to pin this on me, and that's just crazy.
The main point of this entire interview, this discussion, as they called it, was really to get Sherry to say that there would be no way that they would have her DNA like they do. They didn't have a physical altercation. Maybe they were around each other, but there was no way that she ever bit or attacked Sherry. And once they have that, and they have the DNA, this is a done deal.
They asked her to submit a DNA swab, and she wasn't into that either. She says something to the effect of, what, did Sherry and I get into a fight and then I decided to kill her? At that point, that statement, the detectives are like, you know, Stephanie, you have the right to remain silent.
Seems that the last thing worked
You
out
have
all
the
right.
right to an attorney. And they just go through her Miranda rights. Because they know up until that point, they can't really use anything she said against her in a court of law. But they're reading her rights. And they tell her, you don't need to stay here. You don't need to talk to us.
God,
You are
I
not
hate
under
this
arrest.
job.
But we're just trying.
Maybe if management
figure
kept
out
this
more
in
about
one
this
place for
case,
more
we're
than a
just
minute
trying
at a
to
time.
exclude you as a
Anyway, some
suspect.
folks
And they
I don't
say,
know about
"Do you
apparently
wanna
need
leave?"
someone to escort a
What does she
wagon
do?
I don't care about
She states
over
that
to Comp's
she
instead.
needs to talk
So,
to a lawyer.
we'll have fun
and
with
then
that.
She walks out, but they already have what they need.
Now, who's waiting for her outside of that interrogation room there?
The detectives were waiting to investigate. Police searched her home, and they found diaries. One of the entries was, I found out that John is getting married. I was very depressed.
You know, I don't
Photos of John in that diary, and she talked a lot about how the breakup was affecting her at work. They also noticed, though, that there was no diary entry about the car theft that she had reported.
The break-in where she lost her gun. Yeah.
They do some more searching. They look into her employee records. They find that she was off work from February 21st to the 24th and returned to work on the 25th. They couldn't find that there were any visible injuries on her person. Again, this is someone who went 30 years without anything on her record. So after her arrest, just say the rest of the department was pretty surprised.
Still seems big
In the
enough
early
to me.
2000s, reality TV was beginning to dominate the airwaves. Every show needed to be bigger, flashier, and more scandalous than the last. But in the case of one infamous dating show, the real drama was happening off screen, and it would shape the future of reality TV forever. There's something about Miriam. Seemed like a pretty standard dating competition. 6 young men vied for the affection of Miriam Rivera, a beautiful model from Mexico. But when Miriam revealed that she was a trans woman during the show's finale, the on-screen drama sparked an international uproar
Shit!
concerning sexuality, whether reality television had finally gone too far.
What a day! You can rock! Come on!
They have enough to take Stephanie Lazarus to trial, and that happened February 6th, 2012. Trial lasted
This is gonna sting!
Mark Overland was Stephanie's defense attorney. He initially tried to get the whole case dismissed based on she should have been identified as a suspect from the get-go. And if you don't declare her a suspect, then this is all based on garbage DNA evidence that came out later. All I can say is, if you have to identify a suspect from the get-go, otherwise you need to throw the whole case out, well, I guess we need to throw out all the whole cases that have ever been. I mean, it's just kind of a ludicrous argument that tried to start. He goes on to try to discredit the DNA evidence, right?
What else is he gonna do? Anybody who follows true crime, even casually, knows that what the prosecution has is dead. So give this attorney credit. They're doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I guess he has some points. He's saying you're using DNA evidence that's been sitting around for a decade or two. He's questioning how it was stored, it was properly sealed. The blood smear on the wall, he said that was an unidentified female, and it didn't match Stephanie or John, but this is a blood smear from the 1980s. So I don't know if you could say it absolutely wasn't identifiable. They just didn't have the technology then. So the whole confrontation that happened between Stephanie and Sherry at the hospital is brought up to court. What happens there?
So what Mark Overland was doing was he was saying Stephanie and Sherry, they did have a confrontation, but it's not the way the prosecution is painting it. See, the prosecution is saying Sherry was confronted by Stephanie, who was threatening her. That's my guy, and I'm not going to give him up. But the defense here is saying, not so fast. It was Stephanie who was telling Sherry, tell your guy to leave me alone because you guys are engaged now. He's trying to contact me, get with me. And he says all those stalking claims, that's not true. So he's trying to play damage control here. He's saying Stephanie is not this jealous person. She's not crazy. She wasn't that close with John, despite what the prosecution is saying, despite what some of these witnesses are saying. And he's going after that bite mark evidence. He said that the envelope that contained that swab, it had a tear in it. The vial was unsealed. And the envelope had been misplaced and wasn't located until they found it in the LA County Coroner's office. This is all they have. They don't have anything else. It's just this one swab. So he's basically saying, you can't put your whole case on this shaky evidence, this one piece of shaky evidence. They don't stop there. The defense also brought up that there was a fingerprint examiner who examined the stereo. They found fingerprints that didn't belong to Sherry, John, or Stephanie. And the Santa Monica PD records manager testified saying there were 2 other car burglaries that happened on March 9th, 1986. So it could be that Stephanie did have a break-in into her car.
The prosecution comes back with she got rid of the murder weapon. This car break-in, she faked it. There is no real evidence besides that shaky police report. The prosecution is leaning on this DNA evidence hard, and they prepared a lot of circumstantial evidence to combat claims of evidence tampering, which could happen, but at that point, it's like in 2004, the evidence was being tested, so this would have been a long game for law enforcement to frame one of their own. It doesn't make sense. They talked about how this break into the condo looked staged. Nothing had been stolen, really. And why would they take a marriage license? And then, of course, they bring up Stephanie's history with John. There's a lot of other things here, a lot of other ties, a lot of other motives, besides just, hey, there's a swab with her DNA on it.
The prosecution is going after a police detective here, which is a pretty serious thing. So they work from the angle of she misused her police training to kill Sherry Rasmussen and cover it up, which betrayed the trust of the entire LAPD. They're labeling her as a narcissistic, obsessed killer and saying, forget about the detective. This is a killer.
When you look at the details of how Sherry was murdered, it's brutal and kind of sadistic. But of course, John, her husband, he's the key to this, right? I mean, without him, all you have is this circumstantial evidence. So they put John up on the stand, and he admitted in court to having an affair with Stephanie during his engagement. Everything they did together. But the defense isn't going to appreciate this, so they're going to go with the husband did it scenario, and they're going to blame John. When they cross-examine him, they're going to say, John, he's the one that discovered her body. He's the one that was gone that day, just at the same time she was being murdered. He was the one that called multiple times while she was being murdered. If he was really that worried about her, wouldn't he have just come home?
But he decided to stop after and go to the bank and get shoes and pick up his dry cleaning.
If this was a husband did it scenario,
it's really just the defense grasping at straws because, sure, you can say those things and they sound intriguing, but they don't matter because Stephanie Lazarus's, as we call them, check boxes, well, most of hers are filled in. What does John have? He's the husband, so he gets a check mark. But other than that, I mean, you might put another check mark for not coming home right away when his wife hasn't answered the phone all day. But, I mean, how many people really suspect that something bad is going to happen?
They checked out his alibi at the time. They can't really go back now, decades later, and check it. Because does that company he worked at even exist anymore? The punch clock cards, are they still around? So all we have to go on is what they did at that time.
March 8th, 2012, after an hour of deliberation, the jury found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. And on May 11th, Stephanie was sentenced to 27 years in prison with the possibility of parole.
Ouch. The jury took everything into consideration. And when you have a case like this, DNA evidence, that's what everyone wants. Why was your DNA at this location at this time? Specifically on the victim. There's no explaining that away. If you're not supposed to be there, why is your DNA there? There's no conspiracy, there's no frame up job place. Stephanie is a police officer. If anything, they're going to protect her, not frame her.
One of the big questions in this case is, what if they had looked at Stephanie Lazarus in 1986? Some people really believe that she would have still gotten away with it because they wouldn't have had that DNA evidence. I kind of question that because they did have a bite mark and they did have the reports of her stalking Sherry. And then, of course, you have the relationship with John. I feel like there was enough there that they could have worked that case, but that's just my own feeling. How do you feel about that?
I think that they did have a lot, and they could have come to that same conclusion, but without the DNA evidence, not sure if a jury would find her guilty or not.
So in a way, this worked out the way it should have, maybe.
Yeah.
Because now that they've got her, she's not getting out of this. I mean, she might get out of prison eventually, because she was sentenced to 27 years and does have the possibility of parole, but they have DNA on her.
I did a lot of reading on this case, Aaron, and watched some YouTube videos. A lot of them frame this case as an LAPD cover-up of one of their own. A lot of the coverage at the time was when this case hit the news. It was a big deal. Love triangle, you have a cop murdering an innocent woman. It was a big deal. And initially I'm looking at this and I think, I don't know if I want to jump to this was a conspiracy, this was a cover-up. I don't know if I think malice when they never investigated her, and then you have some evidence that was destroyed, this chrono log that they had kept a running tally of everything that was happening. You have big gaps in that. People look at all this, they absolutely think this was intentional. They absolutely were not going to investigate it on their own. Again, normally I wouldn't say this is a conspiracy, this is a cover-up. But sadly, LAPD's track record around this time and into the 90s was horrid. There's a whole book written about Notorious B, Biggie Smalls, and cover-up surrounding that. And you have the Rampart scandal. So, whereas I can look at a case like this on its own and think, I think that they just didn't know what to investigate, and eventually things started coming out and they did the right thing. And when they did identify one of their own as a suspect, they moved quickly and they moved quietly and very strategically, and they did the right thing. But I can't help looking back at the 80s and 90s at all these other scandals that the LAPD had and not think, well, maybe there is merit to them covering this up. Maybe there is merit that some of these logs were intentionally disposed of. I don't know.
It's difficult for me to say. I can see why they focused on the robbery gone wrong. I don't feel like evidence really supports that, but I can see why they got off on that. But for me, I think it just sort of became tunnel vision for them. And that's where you could take this through different departments, and other departments probably would have got it right. I will say that there was a detective on the case back in '86 who disputed the Rasmussen's claims. They said he told him about Sherry's problems with Stephanie, and he said, no, they never told me that. So you could wonder, is he just lying? Because I don't feel the Rasmussens were lying. What does it say about this detective?
Yeah, I don't think the Rasmussens would just make this up. There were multiple people all in the know.
All right, my friend, you
Her
have come to the
family
right
would
place.
end up trying to file several lawsuits against the LAPD. One was dismissed as time barred, meaning that the statute of limitation had passed for them to sue the LAPD for this. And the other one was a whistleblower lawsuit that a criminalist named Jennifer Francis had filed. At the time, she alleged that there was misconduct in this investigation surrounding the DNA evidence, and that one actually ended in the city's favor, and they said that there was no evidence of any misconduct. So both the family and this criminalist had sued, but nothing came of either of those civil suits. It's a crazy case. I thoroughly enjoyed researching it and reading about it, there is a book out there that you can read if you want to hear a lot more. It goes way more in depth into the trial and evidence.
One day I'll have to tell you
arguments
about my
that were
summer
made.
hunting walrus
What's
on
this book?
Unamap.
It's The Lazarus Files by Matthew McGough. His last name is spelled McGough. And he has interviews available on YouTube as well. I've watched some of them, and he had talked about it earlier. He had met Stephanie Lazarus because he was looking into this art theft and found her to be very professional. But of course, as things developed, well, he started forming a book in his mind, and it was published in 2019. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free.
Hi, I'm Kelly Martin. To launch a life of creativity, you just need a little spark and a big break.
I'm Chad Lowe. On our new podcast series, The Big Break, Kelly and I talk with actors and take a deep dive into the magical moments that change their careers and lives forever.
In each episode, we take our
Supplies
guests back
are
to
running
the
down
beginning,
fast.
before the starring role, the Golden Globe nominations,
nice.
the Tony wins, and the adoring fame.
That's
We'll
top
talk about
notch.
the stumbles and obstacles they faced along the way, who influenced them, and where they find their inspiration now.
The Big Break goes deeper than typical celebrity interviews. Chad and I have been working actors for almost our entire lives. We'll reveal the hard work and lucky breaks it takes to become a successful leading actor.
Because for every DiCaprio or Jolie, there are thousands who grind it out every day, making their dreams of a creative life come true. Join us on The Big Break, where we explore what it takes to make it.
Follow The Big Break on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening now.
Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free. From Wondery.
This makes me a little nervous as to where it might be.
How you doing tonight, Aaron?
I'm doing fine, Justin. Doing pretty good, actually. How are you?
Doing okay.
As recent, I announced an episode of It's Frightful. It's a fairly new podcast of spooky stories that people have shared on the web. Personal stories. I had shared a story about seeing an unidentified flying object. So we all podcasters. I know Nina from Already Gone has been on there. And so you can expect to hear me on there some more because I'll be on some future episodes. So check out It's Frightful.
This holiday season will certainly be more special than last. It's finally time to get together and exchange thoughtful gifts with the people you care about. In the midst of all the holiday excitement, think about giving yourself the gift of an Audible membership. This is the absolute best time to do it with a special offer of 60% off your first 3 months. With Audible, you can listen to more of whatever you're into because Audible has an unbeatable selection of audiobooks, tons of binge-worthy podcasts, and exclusive originals. As an Audible member, you can choose one title a month, yours to keep forever. You get full access to the Audible streaming library with Plus account. I recently got The Iceman by Anthony Bruno. It's about a notorious hitman who crosses the line of business and pleasure. Right now, for a limited time, save 60% on your first 3 months of Audible. That's only $5.95 a month. Give yourself the gift of listening. For more, go to audible.com/GWP or text GWP to 500-500. That's audible.com/GWP or text GWP to 500-500.
Intimate news here, which means you might be looking for a way to wind down after all the holiday madness. Best Fiends, the best match 3 mobile puzzle game out there, is the perfect reset for your brain. And with more levels being added all the time, there's always something new to play. It's such a fun break for me these days, and it's one of those games that makes 30 minutes feel like 30 seconds. Best Fiends has it all. An amazing storyline, collectible fiends, and tons of fun puzzles. You collect these cute little characters, they're the fiends from the title, and you're trying to defeat the slugs who are the bad guys. I also really appreciate that you can play Best Fiends wherever and whenever you want with offline mode. Download Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends.
Aaron, you know I rail against plea deals. Everyone's probably rolling their eyes right now. Oh, here we go again.
There are definitely people who are on your side with this.
But it's that question of, if you were absolutely innocent, would you take a plea? And I remember I asked you this question once, kind of directly. Yep. You sort of avoided answering it, which I thought was kind of humorous.
No, it's scary because I think about being in that position and it freaks me out.
Why do people that are innocent take plea deals? Obviously, if you plead your case down, then that's less time behind bars, or maybe you're trying to avoid jail time completely. Maybe the police actually got you to believe that you're guilty, even though you're not. Maybe you don't have a lot of faith in the system, and you know that you'll be found guilty, so you want to lessen your time again. But 9 times out of 10, why does someone take a plea deal?
Well, most often we hear it's because their attorney advised them to do that. After all, we always say you need to talk to someone who knows what you're dealing with. That would be an attorney. And if your attorney is saying, I don't like your chances, let's just see what we can do to help you. And that just means already that you're going to be admitting fault, probably. And, well, yeah, if you're innocent, then now you're guilty.
And when we cover a wrongful conviction case, a lot of the times the person took a plea deal. They didn't fight it with tooth and nail. But then they come back and they're like, well, I'm actually innocent, so I don't want to plead guilty at all.
I've come to my senses. I've had a lot of time to think.
Exactly. So, this is the norm. And I understand that plea deals do have, or can have, they can be a useful tool, they can serve a purpose in our justice system. And a quick spoiler alert, tonight's case, nobody gets paid. And you might think tonight's case is a wrongful conviction case, and I will only correct that it is a wrongful convictions case. And it might be one of the largest wrongful convictions cases, or it might be one of the largest miscarriages of justice I've ever read about myself. And for this story, we need to head across the pond. So give a shout out to our UK listeners, all of our UK podcast friends like They Walk Among Us. So with that, what are we talking about tonight, Aaron?
Tonight we're talking about the Horizon scandal, which saw the convictions of hundreds of post office employees in the UK in the 2000s.
So at the time, the UK Post Office had prosecuted over 700
I'm very impressed.
sub-postmasters. This ranged from the year 2000 to 2014. Now, what is a sub-postmaster, Aaron?
Well, I say post office employees.
Okay then,
but
let's take a
further
look.
reading seems to indicate that these are people who work with the post office. Oftentimes they have their own businesses or work with a business that does post office transactions. So here in America, it seems like we just go to the post office.
There are some individual small businesses that do handle post office stuff.
And grocery stores, I guess.
Yeah. But for the most part, we don't have individuals like this. And I guess over in the UK, a lot of these people would be considered contractors or contracted to perform services for the post office. Now, some of these people, it's said that they had stolen 75,000 pounds over the years. They had been stealing from their cash registers.
Is it any wonder my appetite is so healthy when I'm out this way?
Not only do they do post office stuff, but they do lotto ticket stuff and cash machine stuff too. So at the time that the post office had cracked down on all of this theft, they announced like, hey, major theft is coming to an end, and this is a great achievement. Look at all of the people we've prosecuted. Now, there's an interesting way
I need you
post
back on.
office is set up in the UK. They are part of the government, and most of this is considered
Let me
a
know if
public
there's
service.
anything else you need.
But if the post office needs to prosecute somebody,
I've been hearing
they
about
have
you.
the power
Hope you found
to do
time
that.
for some hunting
They
among all
do
these
not
acts
need any
of
independent
philanthropy.
assessment from a prosecutor or anyone else. And when I read that and tried to understand it, it was almost like they can bring criminal charges against you without a grand jury process, without establishing any kind of credible evidence or probable cause. They can just say, we're charging you. That's it. And you can defend yourself, but there's no real process. There's no way to prove like, hey, this guy needs to be arrested for theft, and then the cops have to go and establish probable cause and this and that. No, they can bypass all those steps and just come at you directly.
The actual department that runs the post office is the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy.
This all started back in like the mid to late 90s. It was in May of 1996 that Fujitsu was contracted for like £1 billion to roll out their Horizon computer system across all the post offices in the UK. It was 1999 when they had this fully deployed, but the Department of Security and some other public branches of the government decided to withdraw from their Horizon arrangements, and that left it ultimately with the government agency that you just mentioned and Fujitsu. It's from there where they start seeing this theft.
Well, let's talk a bit about what Horizon is. This system, which was a custom system that was made essentially now for just the post office, was meant to handle transactions, stock taking, and accounting for the UK post office.
You know, I don't know what was available back in 1996 to 1999, but when you think about point of sale services, today we have credit card machines, and restaurants have their whole system where they can seat you at a table and process the tips and process the orders. But you think like a grocery store has to be a little bit more complex because you have to weigh out produce, do transactions, and possibly the manager orders more food for the store to stock the shelves with. So it gets really complex real quick. So this isn't new technology. point of sale systems have been around forever, but the UK Postal Service decided that having their system built from scratch, I mean, you say customized, but really it's from scratch, from the ground up. They think that's the right idea, right way to go forward. And Aaron, I've worked in corporate America. Something like this, a project at this scale, probably requires years in the making. It requires testing, it requires staging, it requires development, and then production. It appears that they rolled this out pretty fast. They created this and rolled it out and didn't have a lot of testing. They didn't have head architects dictating how this is supposed to look. They really just went for the lowest bidder, right?
It was a bidding war. I don't remember exactly how many, but I believe there were at least 6 different companies vying for this contract. And it's not surprising to anyone, I'm sure, but they went with the lowest bidder and the bidder that was going to accept the most risk.
You can say, well, Fujitsu was
Supplies are starting to run low,
but
just so
if you know anything about how corporations work, Fujitsu probably hired a bunch of subcontractors of their own to write the programming language to actually develop a lot of the software for pieces of it. So you can see how this spider webs out. One hand isn't talking to another. It can get messy real quick. They're going through and they're finding some of these sub postmasters are allegedly taking money. And by 2009, there's stories of people being put behind bars. There's a story about a man named Noel Thomas who spent his 60th birthday in prison. This guy's an older gentleman. I won't say that he's not capable of stealing, but he had no criminal record, and he had been running his post office for a while, no problems. This starts to become a trend.
And not all of the theft was thousands of pounds. Some were just hundreds of pounds.
So when it was smaller amounts, maybe that person would get fired, or maybe they would get their license pulled, their ability to do work with the post office. And that's their business. That's kind of what drives people into their business. So depending on the amount of theft that was happening, that determined whether or not the post office sought legal action against the individual. Now, one man named Alan Bates, he was fired and charged